Well, last fall, I have to say, I felt a little bit like Simon Peter, having spent a long night fishing. Disappointed at not having caught any fish, but relieved in a way that I could get out of the boat and wash my nets and maybe have some breakfast. I'd come back from a sabbatical in 2017 with an intention to make another big push here in my ministry at St. John's to try to get us over the hump, whatever the hump might be, and spoke to the vestry about organizing a strategic planning process and pulling together a planning team and creating a plan and then setting out to execute the plan. And then COVID hit, and 2 years of dealing with all the uncertainties of adapting to virtual worship, and when do we reopen, and how, and when do we shut down again, and a variety of conflicts and struggles, and just lots of anxiety in the congregation and the world at large. And wouldn't you know it, but I was counting on taking another sabbatical in the year 2022. My official letter of agreement with the parish says that every 5 years I'm eligible to do this, and I'd been here for 7 before I took the first one, and 5 years at All Saints Carmel before that without a sabbatical. So I looked ahead even in 2017 to 2022 and thought about the fact that my daughter would be graduating from high school in the spring and getting ready to go off to college, and I thought, yeah, that summer will be a good time for me to take another sabbatical and just kind of take stock of everything. And so last fall, as I said, I was feeling kind of tired and looking ahead to a sabbatical, and I even proposed to the vestry that maybe we should think of 2022 as kind of a sabbatical for the parish. And we'd do worship and the basics of pastoral care and so forth, but we wouldn't take on any big new projects or ministries or building projects, but just kind of take it easy and recuperate, wash our nets. Well, I've already told the story probably more times than you care to hear about the phone call that I got in the last week of October from Ali Fayez, a Afghan SIV refugee who just arrived in Petaluma with his wife and 3 small children and 3 other families. And, it was a little bit like that moment in the gospel story where Jesus gets into Peter's boat and says, "Would you mind putting out from the shore a little bit so that I can get some space from this crowd that's pressing in on me and deliver my teaching?" Doesn't sound too bad, does it? And I figured, yeah, okay, so we'll see what we can do in some modest way to help Ali and these families get situated here in Petaluma. And then as time went on, more families arrived, and it also became clear that the organization that had brought them here had no experience or real capacity for refugee resettlement, and that no one else in our community did either. And so we set out into the deeper water of trying to organize a community-based refugee resettlement effort out of St. John's Episcopal Church. And we let down our nets. And yesterday morning we had the first of what will be an ongoing series of monthly meetings with our now 8 Afghan refugee families. And this was a meeting, sounds simple enough, have a meeting, but this was a meeting that had been at least a month, more like 2 in the making. We had it at Casa Grande High School in the library there because it's the perfect place to have this meeting. It's within easy walking distance of the apartment complex where the Afghan families are living. The library room itself is perfect with tables that can be moved around and a projector and a screen. An adjoining computer lab room, big room where you can move the tables around for childcare. So anyway, we had approached the principal at the high school last month before Christmas, or well now the month before last, and set that process in motion. And then at the meeting, Sandy Hall, one of our members who's volunteered to coordinate our rides program, spoke to the families about how we had put together this group of volunteers from around the community, some of them St. John's members, the majority not, who would be willing to take them to appointments, to go shopping, to go to the doctor or the dentist or social services up in Santa Rosa or other kinds of transportation needs that they might have, that they could call the cell phone that we had purchased for Sandy and the designated phone number, or send a text message and arranged to get a ride. So we spoke to them about that yesterday morning. We also spoke to them about the Family Friends program that also took several months of organizing, where we now have matched each one of those 8 Afghan families with a couple of other families here in Petaluma who we recruited and trained in a couple of Zoom meetings on Saturday mornings in January, and are now reaching out to them to befriend them and be a kind of informal cultural orientation mentorship program for them. And Francis, who read our reading from Isaiah this morning, handed a letter to each of the families with the contact information of their new family friends. We also had Elliot Enriquez, the outreach director from the Petaluma Health Center, who took a little bit of doing to reel in. But he showed up yesterday morning and oriented the families who were there to the Petaluma Health Center and all the services that are available to them at no cost through that organization. We introduced them to a couple of members of our community, Paul and Brenda, who are, well, one retired and one still actively working for the United States Agency for International Development, both of them having spent significant time in Afghanistan, who volunteered their services to help support these families. truly an abundant catch of fish. And yet, we're out here on the deep water with all these fish straining the capacity of our nets. You can hear the sound of some tearing. We need some other boats to come along to help get the fish back to shore. And I think we all, at moments, feel a little bit like Simon Peter falling on our knees and saying, "Get away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." All of our readings this morning, whether it's St. Paul talking about being the last of the apostles to encounter the risen Christ, not worthy really to even to be called an apostle because of his history of persecuting the church. Or the prophet Isaiah crying out, "Woe is me, Lord, for I am a sinful man, a man of unclean lips, among a people of unclean lips." And Simon Peter falling to his knees in the boat and praying that the Lord will depart from him. All of them speak to the fact that venturing out to do God's will, venturing out into the deep water, saying, "Lord, send me to speak to your people in your name," takes us beyond our capacities, takes us out of our comfort zone, calls on us to rely in a way that perhaps we are unaccustomed to and unwilling to on the grace of God, being willing to venture out into the deep water, which is not just deep but treacherous, to take on the responsibility of resettling Afghan refugees means dealing with certain aspects of our society that we might prefer not to encounter. It means coming face to face with questions about just what happened in Afghanistan. What is still happening there? Why was it that after 40 years of military intervention in that country and 20 years of occupation, we failed so miserably to bring peace and stability and democracy to that land? Venturing out into the deep water means confronting the fact that we're not equipped here in Sonoma County to resettle refugees, that we've preferred to leave that work to places like Oakland and Sacramento, and that the biggest challenge that we face in helping these families to reestablish their lives here is that it's impossible to afford to live in this place. A problem that affects not just these refugees, but many in our community. That somehow we have allowed shelter to be a private commodity, something to speculate on, rather than a human right and a public good. These are vexing problems. And yet, God calls us to know to hear, to see, and not to be daunted if, as Isaiah says, the people around us refuse to hear, refuse to see, refuse to understand. Being sent forth to do the will of God does not mean that you will be successful. The word about the cross should be enough to convince us of that. Does not mean that just because you're trying to do something good and beautiful in the name of the gospel that everybody's going to suddenly change their minds and agree with you and start walking alongside you. They might for a little while, but then when the more vexing problems show their face, they might turn aside. Who knows? And yet the call keeps coming to us. Because the call to go beyond ourselves, to go beyond the limits that we place on our own capacities, the call to venture out into those deep waters where we have to rely on God's grace and not our own abilities, to go beyond where we are in control, where we feel comfortable. There's also a call to freedom. It's a call to experience an abundance, the abundance of God's spiritual gifts working in our lives, in the lives of the people around us, that we really can't experience when we stay on the shore, when we stay where it's safe and it's comfortable, where our religion is about our own sense of comfort and security and satisfaction.